Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Psycosmos. Appreciate you guys as always. The amount of support I've gotten in the last couple of days has been outstanding. Could potentially be the moon had crossed over into Cancer, activating my sacred secretion cycle. Jupiter's also in Cancer as well, so I think that there was a lot of growth that has happened over the last couple of days for my channel, for a lot of my viewers, and my TikTok, my Instagram, my YouTube. It's all been growing, and a lot of you guys have joined my school. I've had a lot of people join that. I had a few people take a look at my Astraya AI app. If you're interested in that, very phenomenal functioning app right now that I'm still building and working upon, but essentially it cross-references your astrology, both Vedic and traditional Western astrology. It also gives you, numerological information. It gives you foods that you should be eating based off of your cell salt signature data. So I want to get right into this video. Today's video is going to be about the theory of all things, I guess you could say. It's a combination and it's a multifaceted approach to understanding how psychologically we formed a lot of the mythological and spiritual and even scriptural from the Bible. Jewish mysticism, Islamic mysticism, things like that. How we were able to create these and how we've projected our own scientific creation, our own beautiful creation, really, by God, onto all of our stories and myths and legends. So first we're going to start in the brain, and we're just going to dive right in. The brain has 12 cranial nerves. Now, in biblical scripture, and in plenty of other cultures as well, it really was a caveat of understanding the brain, the sciences, the functionality behind the brain, and how this has evolved. Okay, so ever since a very, very, very long time ago, obviously, we have been dissecting the human body. We're fascinated with how we function, how we operate, and how we work. I remember I was taught in university, and I mean, this was a nice university, and they taught me in one of my science classes that human beings really hadn't started experimenting with cadavers and, checking the body until like the 1500s in Europe with Leonardo da Vinci and other, medieval time philosophers. That is like the laziest amount of research. I'm actually, and without getting negative, I'm very disappointed. I hold 2 bachelors, a master's, and a doctorate. I'm extremely disappointed with the amount of college educational information, universities and whatnot. They are, and I'm not speaking about all professors and whatnot, but this motivates me to want to become a professor. I think that I've thought about it a lot recently. And I've decided that I think I really would like to teach, especially people who are in like their early 20s. I think that this information is really crucial for understanding the world. And I learned a lot of this stuff between the age of, 19 and 25. That's where I got the bulk of my research into this. Of course, I had to go down the rabbit hole myself. But I think that I was essentially very unimpressed with all of my professors, not a single one. And of course, I've probably had well over 50 professors, let's just say, right? I don't think I was impressed by a single one, just being completely open and honest. There were a few that really stuck out to me. There were a few that had passed away, and I would have really liked to have met and had long, detailed conversations with. But, a lot of the, especially for like my psychology, there was one professor where they used a lot of his work, and I really would have liked to meet him. Otherwise, I don't know a lot of professors or university teachers that I was really impressed by. And that's not a knock at them. It's just like they're lazy. It was so clear and obvious that they were lazy. They regurgitated tons of information. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you my obviously very biased, so take everything I say with a grain of salt, but my very biased, but what I would also say very well researched approach. First and foremost, as we were going back to it, the human body and mind has been an obsession of ours. Okay, not just health and longevity, right? Like the pursuit of the immortality or the elixir of truth and all this other stuff that we've really looked into over the course of the last multi-thousands of years. But we've been fascinated with how any of this can even operate. I mean, you get to a point of being 30, 40, 50 years old, things start to break down, but you are almost in awe and in wonderment of how you're able to stay alive and function, and how the brain has evolved and how our bodies have evolved, being created through evolution, everything. You take all accounts of how human beings have become human beings today. We're obsessed with this because it just doesn't make a lot of sense if you look at it from just a scientific perspective. From a scientific perspective, you've got this brain that does so many things on the underbelly. It functions and works in mysterious ways, very similar to God. Here's where the caveat comes in. The oldest generations of human beings who developed consciousness, the wisest of our ancestors, all throughout all cultures, you can get into the sticks of it. All cultures essentially believed that every bit of existence was spiraling and cascading within itself. What that means is you are made in the image of God, essentially. The brain is functioning as the big ball of light which controls everything on the underbelly of your existence. You can be as conscious as you'd like, but the subconscious is going to rule everything no matter how hard you try. There is no physiological means, as far as I'm concerned. There's very little that you can do with consciousness in terms of this. The one caveat to that would be something like the Christos or sacred secretion cycle, where you're purposefully utilizing your consciousness to essentially control your subconscious. What do I mean by all this? You're not thinking about breathing. You're not thinking about secreting your hormones. You're not thinking about moving CSF flow through your body. Your brain and your body does this automatically. However, if you consciously apply breath work, if you consciously apply meditation, moments of silence, etc., those are things that you can consciously do to control the subconscious. And that's really the root of life from a psychological perspective. It's using our conscious to rule the subconscious. So when they started dissecting these bodies and they found, oh, wow, we've got 12 cranial nerves. Some cultures, probably assumed 9 or 10 or whatever. We've got all these different cultures with different numbers. It would be really hard without the use of technology. It would be really hard to get it down to a finite point of saying, how many nerves are actually ruling everything in the body? How many cranial nerves are there really? Well, thanks to a lot of people like Dr. Wilhelm Heinrich Schussler, Dr. George W. Carey, and Dr. Inez Perry, who was a woman, we discovered, well, it's probably a rediscovery or what have you, but they found that there's essentially at the root of all human creation, there's 12 cell salts. So if you burn away a body and you take that composition of the ashes, it's roughly around 12 chemicals. And depending on your astrological signature or your vibrationatory signature, there's some more cell salts in the body than others. And this is really where the root of astrology comes in, because depending on what specific months you were in the womb determines the 9 frequencies that you're going to get within the womb, which then means that there's roughly about 2 or 3 frequencies that are left out while you're developing, which are going to be the cell salt deficiencies that you have, which are going to lead to disease. So you're not completely whole or unified as a human being. You're born into sin because you don't gestate for 12 months. If we did, theoretically speaking, we could probably perfect the human organism. But until we figure out a way to stall pregnancy in a healthy way or what have you, that's just a crackpot theory I have. But however that would function, the root of disease, yes, disease starts in the gut. Yes, it's this and this. Yes, it's acidity versus alkalinity and blah, blah, blah. Yes, all that stuff is true. At the end of the day, your cell salt deficiencies cause more disease than anything else. So I'm a Cancer. That means that I have a calcium fluoride, I believe, deficiency. And you can look up your cell salt deficiency. If that's something you've never heard of, I highly recommend you look into that. So I don't take calcium supplements, but I eat foods that are heavy in calcium, and that actually helps me in a lot of ways. It helps me regulate my emotions, I would say, is the best of the experiencing side effects that I guess I get from that. Because if I eat broccoli, if I eat steak, if I have dairy in good quantities from, real good sources of dairy, then I feel better, essentially. But I don't do it all the time, of course. You have to supplement. You have to have a balanced diet, which means you have to eat around the plate. So anyway, getting back to this, we dissected bodies. We discovered that there's essentially 12 cranial nerves. Well, biblically, you have the 12 tribes of Israel, which all come from the 12 families. All right, so you have 12 that bleed into 12. Now, what you need to understand about Christianity, if you follow Christ, which I think most of you guys do, it doesn't mean you have to be a Christian or a Catholic or anything, but you like Jesus. Let's just assume, hypothetically, you like Jesus. If you like Jesus, you have to study Old and New Testament of the Bible. And if you study Old and New Testament, you find that they're vastly different. Vastly, vastly different. And the ways that they're different, one of the major ways that they're different is that the Old Testament, a lot of people don't really know this, but the Old Testament from the Jewish faith, the Jewish people, when you study the Zohar, when you study the Talmud, when you study the Kabbalah especially, which all of these books kind of interweave into each other. It's the same as the Bible, except the Bible is one book, whereas with all these other, the Zohar is like 22 or 23 books or something like that. It's insane. No, I did not read all of it. No, there's no way. People study their whole lives. They study the Zohar their whole lives. They're like 80-year-old men. They still haven't finished it. So it would be wrong of me to try to pretend like I know everything, but I've studied enough. Not just like the Essential Zohar, that book that was written by that guy. Like, I've studied at a yeshiva with people. Okay, people will make fun of me, but people can't even do that, because they can't get in. I was able to get in by merit, by what I know, and then I was teaching people in the yeshiva about Christ consciousness, sacred secretion. And guess what? They loved it. Do you want to know why? Because these people were so well studied that they believed that Yeshua, the Spirit of Christ, was in the Old Testament, within the burning bush. If you take the crowns of Hebrew literacy and you apply it to their letter system, it unlocks secret messages. Okay, so yes, they're very secretive people. But one of the things that they essentially believe is that, that old, very frequently quoted thing, you're made in the image of God. But they believe that to a metaphysical and literal degree. All right. When they say you're made in the image of God, they really do believe this, as in our physical image as a human body is a divine reflection of the entire universe. I'm going to showcase that today. And yes, you probably know stuff like golden ratio. The spiral of DNA is the same as the spiral of all energy mechanics. Yes, we're talking quantum. We're also talking literal. I'm going to showcase that to you. And we're also going to touch on some things that a lot of you guys have commented, like flat earth and all that. So stick around. I'm going to showcase a lot of this stuff to you guys. So we've got 12 cranial nerves. These are the 12 families that bleed into the 12 tribes, because these 12 cranial nerves bleed into the 12 rib cage bones of the body. And the reason this is important to understand is because you are at the center. Okay, so that's what I really want to drive home here. You're at the center. What does that mean? You essentially, everything that you feel emotionally happens within that midsection. The purpose of humanity really culminates from that midpoint. You've got as above, so below. The inner thalamus of the brain, which you can't really see here, but the inner thalamus of the brain is in the middle. And the brain and the body are reflections of each other. Okay, so let me see. I think I've got it. So notice, if you look at the brain, you'll see the lines. It looks like a maze. You'll see like these like round objects in the cerebellum, and you'll see like the cranial nerves and such. The human body itself looks almost like it's a reflection of the brain in many ways. It's just larger and it's more segmented. It's more segregated, right? But the inner middle part, which is the celiac ganglion center, the gut brain, the genital microbiome, the gut genital microbiome. You know, there's tons of different scientific terms for it. The middle of the brain interacts with the middle of the body. And this creates a channel. It creates a portal of energy which cycles throughout your body, which is essentially your soul, okay? But the soul, as it's regulating, the root of that soul is the spirit. And the spirit is what guides you. It's your gut instinct, your gut intuition. Why is that? Well, because the celiac ganglion is interconnected into all of these parts. So notice the brain, notice the body. If you were to just take the body and smush it really close together, it would pretty much look very similar to the brain, okay? The lungs, the intestinal tract, all of these things are very, very similar. Now, the diaphragm is the midpoint of this. This is, you know, you breathe in, you breathe out. Okay, so the diaphragm, in regards to this entire operation, is essentially the firmament, all right? And the entire tract of the body is all connected by the spinal column. But the celiac ganglion, which almost looks like a crucified Christ, it's the inner you, it's the inner child of you. This is interconnected into all the parts of the body. And when I say all the parts, it really is like a lower brain, because the brain sits at the top and interconnects downward, but the celiac connects in the middle to all things, including the brain, including the genitals, and it runs down to the legs and the feet as well. So this is the center point of mass within the body. This is where all the energy culminates, and this is where you feel things. Love, sadness, heartbreak, happiness, anger, frustration, you know, all of those feelings come from here because it's reading different organs. Imagine the organs are different satellites which pick up different frequencies. And the celiac plexus is where those frequencies are essentially decoded to give you a biochemical reaction. Now, when you read people like Richard Dawkins, who, you know, no offense, but I can't really stand the hyper scientific, you know, full of themselves types of guys that exist out there. Neil deGrasse Tyson, that'd be another example. He's a little bit of a joke, but doesn't mean that they don't have important things to say. Now, Dawkins will say something like everything's biochemical, every response is biochemical, and he's completely wrong. Everything is quantum. So light and frequency and vibration are the root of all stimuli. So, you know, you see something, you smell something, you hear something, and then your brain has a response. Then your gut has a response. And tapping into that gut brain is extremely crucial. Keep in mind, this is where we all come from, is that center point of mass within the body. You know, here's a woman. Let me go back. Here's the woman. Here's the celiac plexus right here, right around here, right? Well, that's where the baby's made. That's, well, you know, the baby's made down here and then it ascends, I guess you could say. It really descends to ascend. It's kind of interesting. But the babies are formed here in the human body, in the woman. This is where life really begins, is in the womb. And the womb is here in that center point. And obviously the mothers and the children have a divine connection with each other. But this also plays into, again, Jewish mysticism. They talk very heavily and very frequently about the mother, the Shekinah, the Bereshit, there's like tons of other words for it. But essentially, it is, if you were to take it and interlay it into Gnostic sense, which was just an evolution of Jewish mysticism, it would be the divine Sophia. And a lot of the mysticism around Judaism is about the rejection of the mother to the children, because the Jewish faith sees themselves as the chosen people of God. So they feel as though they, they get along with the idea of the demiurgical creator, Yaldabaoth, however you want to kind of see that. A lot of people think it's the devil. They're kind of a segregational caveat, but I like to compare it to like Zeus, Hades, and Poseidon, all three of which were essentially terrible, but everybody always sees like the devil and Hades as very similar, but Hades doesn't really do as many bad things as Zeus and Poseidon, whereas Poseidon would be more like Lucifer with the trident, and Zeus would be more like the demiurgical Yaldabaoth crazy wackadoo God that, you know, thinks it's God, but it's really not. That is essentially the same as that gut microbiome. That's essentially the celiac ganglion in the body. And the intermediary of that is the heart. The diaphragm is the separator, okay? So you've got the pleroma from the Gnostic sense. That's like everything above the diaphragm. Father and mother are conversating constantly with each other. The monad gives its energy to the heart. It pumps then blood up back to the heart and pumps energy so that the toroidal energy can continue to manifest. But everything below the diaphragm is like a cheap knockoff copycat of the higher mind, the brain. And the heart itself is also like an intermediary pump. It's also like the inner chamber of the thalamus or even the gut brain. So this is where you get this Trinity idea or this Trinitarian aspect from. With that being said, the Jewish faith sees our body as a reflection of the universe. The Egyptian faith, the Hindu faith, the Buddhist faith to some degree, all of these like enriching, and you know, yeah, you want to get into Atlantis and all this other stuff. Bring me a book from an Atlantean, okay? Bring me alien stuff, okay? Like, if you want to be able to make sense of a lot of this, we've got to cut out the things that you just can't really prove. I like to believe that Tartaria is real, but I also understand that people didn't really know what Tartaria was until like 2018, and there weren't a lot of people talking about it. And since then, we've had tons of ability to fake and falsify documentation and photographs and things like that. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean I don't think it's real. I like to be practical, okay? I like to be pragmatic. You want to get into the conspiratorial weeds, you'll be lost there forever. Trust me, I was there. I was one of you guys that are in my comments that are like, yeah, but the earth is flat. It's like, bro, it doesn't matter at the end of the day what shape the earth is. You don't control any of that. It's the same way as astrology. I utilize astrology from a psychological perspective because Carl Jung was a fucking genius. Maybe he wasn't the best guy in the world. I know there's a lot of rumors that circulate that he didn't treat his wife very well. At the end of the day, I don't care. Carl Jung had phenomenal research. And I'm not going to discount the things that he said that were right based off of rumors, whether they're true or not. If it comes out that they're true, I'm still going to say he was real fucking genius in what he taught. But I, you know, not that I condone negative behaviors. In fact, you got to treat the women in your life correctly. And if he were a real psychologist, he would have known that. You know, some people say that he was like a swinger or whatever. Maybe that's true. I don't know. Freud was screwed up. Adler was screwed up. There's tons of people in the psychological world that are screwed up, and that includes me. You know, everybody's screwed up. So don't look at me and think I'm perfect. I'm just trying my very best to be the best person that I can be. I've cracked a lot of codes for myself, taught it to thousands of people, changed literally millions of people's lives. I have, I think, a total across all my platforms, I have over 20 million views, so I know I've changed some people's lives. But I'm just trying my best like anybody else. I'm not perfect, and I would never say that I'm right about everything. But what I do know is there are people who talk about, you know, machine elves and aliens and flat earth, and they can't pay their bills. They argue with their spouses. They are miserable people. Okay, so if you're gonna go into the depths of the conspiratorial theories, maybe that's your divine purpose, and you're here to prove that the Earth is a triangular shaped donut. But at the end of the day, if you can't get the other faculties in your life proper, then I don't really want to learn from you. I don't really want to hear from you. You know what I mean? And again, I know what I just said about Jung. It's the same thing. It's like if I were to find out that he really was a POS, then I probably would be less positive about his experiences. But from what I can tell, it's just rumors. So getting back to this, the celiac ganglion, which is our inner child, crucified against the cross, like the spine, okay, ascending up into the Father. This has to deal a lot with, like, you know, the shape of creation, the shape of all things, astrology, etc. Now, let's take a look at what I believe is the synonymous counterpart to the earth. I believe it's the stomach. Let's explain why. Couple of things. Number one, the stomach sits below the diaphragm. All right. It also has an interconnectory tube that goes straight through up the diaphragm up the spinal column into the mouth. All right, so the manna from heaven falls down from the earth. I've thought about it a lot. Perhaps that's asteroids. Perhaps asteroids and meteorites and comets are the food of God, and he is eating them, and they come down here, and it gets digested. But I also think it's metaphysical as well, because, there would be a North and South Pole in that regard, and one would potentially go up into space, and the other would potentially go down into the pits of hell, which would be your intestinal tract, right? Where do you feel the most pain in your body? For most people, the majority of their life, it's down near that intestinal tract. Especially for females, cramping. Now, if you've got heart disease or lung disease or cancer, different story, but that's just you. Not everybody dies of that. Everybody's going to have diarrhea at least one point in their life. Everybody. Every woman is going to go through a menstrual cycle at least one point in their life, multiple times, obviously, but some women have, genetic disorders and whatnot. Every person's going to feel pain in their gut. I don't care who the hell you are. You're gonna get the poops, and you're gonna feel the pain, and you're gonna sit on that toilet and pray to God that it ends sooner than later. If you're following me, then you get what I'm saying. But then you've got the heart, which would be above the diaphragm, and you've got the spleen, which is actually the moon. It's the lower embodiment of the lunar organ. The spleen is ruled by the moon kabbalistically. The heart is ruled by the sun kabbalistically, Tiferet. And so and then Malkuth would essentially be that root chakra or the intestinal tract, or really it's below the genital. It's the coccygeal sacrum, but that interweaves into the celiac ganglion too. So we've got this spread. All right, now this is my first problem with the flat earth model. It says that the sun is below the firmament. I don't see how that would be probable. It just doesn't seem like it's an extremely practical approach. Now, I could believe that the moon was below the firmament. I could believe that because if you've ever seen the moon, especially on a full moon, and you're looking at that thing, you're like, damn, that thing is beautiful. Now, they called that the shining mirror, because the moon is the reflector of God's grace. It's the reflector of the sunlight, but it's also the reflector of all the light throughout the universe, not just the sun, which is why it's got its own luminary body as its own thing. But getting back into it, let's talk about how all of these things are interconnected. If you understand the precession of the equinox and how we're in the age of Aquarius, right? This is what they're saying now. We're in the age of Aquarius. When Jesus was born, we were at where Pisces and Aries intersects. This is a reset, because this cycle moves backwards. And the reason that's important to understand is that when you go up or down a dimension, everything gets inverted. Okay, so when we look up and we see the 7 planets and they're moving in the whatever, and the sun and the moon are moving across the ecliptic, and they're going forward across the zodiac, on the higher level of the zodiacal plane, which would be that 24 to 26,000 year cycle. I think it's probably closer to 24,000 years, but to each their own. When we go across that cycle, what we find is that it moves backwards from what we're used to. And the reason for that is because when you go up or below a dimension, you have to get inverted. And I'm going to show that to you even more. So now we're in the end of the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius, right? And all of the zodiacal points have some form of scientific medical conditioning. You can look up the Encyclopedia on Medical Astrology. That is one of the absolute best books I've ever read in terms of astrology. And it showcases and details a lot of those functionalities. In fact, medicine was very heavily rooted in astrological signatures for the longest thousands of years. It's how we've survived. Each zodiacal sign has its own frequency. Each frequency rules over different plants, herbs, medicines, any form of thing that we can grow or harvest. And depending on what your ailment was, you use those specific chemicals in those herbs and plants, and then it helps heal you. And this is how we developed medicine for thousands of years cross-culturally. All right, this was Chinese medicine. This was Hindu Tantra medicine. This was European medicine. And then, of course, the Western world today is a little bit different. This is why doctors are paid a lot, because they're really not taught this system anymore. Now, within the body, you have cells. and everybody knows this. But again, this is another inverted thing because it's so tiny and it's on a different dimensional plane of existence that things have to get inverted. You have a nucleus, which acts as a brain. You have an endoplasmic reticulum, which essentially acts as, I guess you could say, the blood-brain barrier. And then you have the cytoplasm, which is like CSF, cerebrospinal fluid, and you've got mitochondria. Now, this is really important. You know, the cell membrane's like the skin, but the mitochondria acts kind of like, I would say, multiple different things. It's almost like if you were to take the lungs and the intestines and combine them into one thing, because they essentially breathe, you know, but they are also, they look like a lung or a intestinal, you know, corpuscle, I guess you could call it. But this is a direct reflection of how energy is created and exerted within a cell. Okay, it's the same as your intestinal tract and your lungs feeding energy in multiple different ways within your body. So everything just gets inverted and it gets different. Well, this is one scope of the universe. Notice how it looks like an eyeball. Notice how it looks like, you know, nervous points here. There's like little nervous systems, and it's all interconnecting galaxies and whatnot. Keep in mind, we claim that there's like 88 constellations, and there's roughly 85 to 90 openings within the body. Foramen, I think there was one word for them. So it's almost like we're within a system that is within a body. And when you study how NASA and pretty much every major astronomical functioning organization today, how they say where we exist in the universe, we exist right here in the middle. And you know, middle, of course, it's maybe a little bit off to the right, but it's cylindrical shaped, just like you. This is what they claim that the universe is created by, this cylindrical toroidal shape. And the Virgo supercluster is exactly where you would expect Virgo to be. It's in the midsection. It's essentially the solar plexus of the universe. So when our ancestors said, hey, we're in the middle, they weren't really meaning like the direct middle, but what they were saying was, hey, we're a reflection, we're a map of where we live. And we need to respect that map, and we need to love that map very much, and we need to recognize and understand that we are at essentially the center, which is why all of our being is held in the center, whether it's the center of the mind or it's the center of the body. And this is super, super important to understand from, you know, again, a flat earth perspective or a round earth perspective or whatever kind of stuff you want to believe in. If you're not coupling it with this information, then you're not going to get the full scope. This is another diagram of the universe where you have that emanation of light, and it moves throughout the universe in this cylindrical pattern. Well, all you got to do is take the image and flip it so that this is the brain and it goes downward. And bada bang, bada bam, you've got a human body with the brain acting as that big ball of light where all the source is emanating out of. It is both within the world through the nervous system and outside of the world, outside of the universe via the channel of the neck, the pearly gates, the ascension mechanism. So what Christ represented as this Virgoian concept, because keep in mind, here was where Christ came. The complete opposite of that, as we entered the age of Pisces, the reflection would be us entering Virgo. Okay, so we entered Pisces from Aries. That is essentially from the shadow of that is us going from Libra to Virgo. Okay, so there's an axis point here. It's a threshold point. The Virgo to Libra is the autumnal equinox. Where is the Jewish major holiday, which would be Rosh Hashanah, and then followed shortly by Yom Kippur, which are two of the biggest holidays in Judaism. Right there, Virgo to Libra. They worship a western-facing wall, not an eastern-facing one, because this is the western front. This is the evening, because they're obsessed with the mother aspect, the feminine aspect of all creation, and yet, you know, theoretically, if they understood the concept of Christ, they would get it, but They are still believing that Christ was not. And this is, I think, just more dogma than anything. It's more dogmatic. And there was also, too, Christians that treated them poorly, and the Jews treated the Christians poorly. So there's a lot of vehemency and hatred between the groups, and the Muslims, too. But let's put all that aside. Let's look at the real facts here. We're existing in this ecosystem, this divine ecosystem, which is a cylindrical in its capacity. It's in this middle point of the universe, okay? And see how here's like the whole scope, and then there's our supercluster. Here's Virgo. It's like essentially in the middle, okay? And then you go in deeper, and the galaxy is almost like a cell or a corpuscle. So it's really fascinating, but essentially what all of the major religions, including Judaism, and Christians obviously have no clue about this, but including Judaism, believe that we're in a closed system. It could be expanding, but you grow, you expand, right? And it is constantly moving, constantly fluxing. Study the Taurid meteor stream. There's like millions or thousands or whatever they call meteors that go from Taurus to Scorpio every single year. And we can witness that from our planet. That's the exact same as like the cerebrospinal fluid, or the energy moving from your lower brain into the genital region, then going from the genital region back to the lower brain. It is the exact same functional spectrum. So, case in point, you are at the middle crux of all creation. You are at the very dead center of all things. Just as like it infinitely goes large, it also infinitely goes small. And quantum mechanics teaches us that the smallest particles are all connected to the largest. It's through like all these different ideas that they have, but essentially, I know people are like, yeah, we're breathing stardust, and we're literally made of the same atoms as stars and all that stuff. Well, yeah, we're all interconnected, but the reason why our ancestors respected our position was because they really believed we were at like the very dead center. We're essentially all cells on an organism, which we call Mother Earth. And I actually have a spread I can show you guys. It's in my school, right? So you can go and you can partake in the school if you're interested to learn more about this. But I've mapped out the 12 zodiacal frequencies, the 12 tribes of Israel as a root of people all across the world, starting with Aries going all the way to Pisces. When you see it, you can't unsee it. It starts to make perfect sense from the cultures and how all of them act and operate differently. They're all embodying the 12 major zodiacal frequencies, the 12 tribes of Israel, so to speak. And all of this is interconnected in a beautiful mechanism, in a beautiful symbiotic relationship. And you're at the dead center of it. And this is why the Christ seed is born at the dead center of you, through that celiac ganglion, through multiple different columns of CSF flow, and all of the different, I've already kind of gone into it. But point is this, you're a beautiful, wonderful, immaculate creation. You're like one in a trillion bajillion that you would come out as who you are on this earth doing what we're doing. And what do we do with that power? Right? It's just like the gut microbiome in your body. I like to believe, based off of all my research, that we are essentially the gut flora of our creator. That is my fervent belief. I like to think that the universe is not as this extremely large, infinitesimal thing like it projects. I think that if the ratio were accurate, we would probably be about the size of a blood cell within the human body, comparatively. Now, one cell can actually make a very large difference in the body, depending on immunology and everything else. If you get sick, for example, that could be one way in which like the cells in your body, even one cell could make a major difference, right? So choose to be that cell today. Choose to look at yourself as this grand contributor to the macrocosm as you contribute to your microcosm, okay? As above, so below. God wants a relationship with you, just in the same way that you should try to be healthy and you should try to respect the cells that are within your body. They all have a will of their own. If they didn't, then they would have to be interconnected into something, or else they wouldn't be able to function without being connected to something. But they are connected to something, and that something is source. They are given information. There is information at the core of our DNA that keeps them functioning. And they go and they read that DNA in order to get that information. So it is very similar to you, okay? And we're all just little cells packed very tightly together on this planet. And this planet is probably like an organ in a body. And the other objects are also organs that are functioning through a matrix. And perhaps we're moving, perhaps they're moving. Who knows? But, the Bible says it's a fixed earth with a firmament. And it makes sense from a biological, if you were to interlay it into the anatomy of it. I don't think it's supposed to be taken as like the most literal thing. I think that the Van Allen belts are, it's not a glass dome. And we know that now. We know it's not a glass dome. We know that it's a electromagnetic frequency that will essentially destroy anything that tries to pass through it, including comets and meteors, which is why they explode when they come into contact with the Earth. But I think that the Earth is possibly like the stomach, or it's like the intestines, where once you get into the intestines, it's like you're going into the underworld, you're going into the inner cities of the Earth. And what do you find? Hierarchy. Low intestine, high intestine, small intestine, large intestine. And what happens? The people who are at the top of the hierarchy, the top of the intestines, they get the good food, right? They get like the digestible bile and everything, but it's not poop yet. And then as it goes through the track, all of the lower bacteria in the lower hierarchy, they just get shit. So it's really a divine reflection in our stomachs. This is why your gut microbiome is so important. And also your gut microbiome is about a third of your entire body that is full of cells that are not you, right? These are cells that are not human cells. They are bacterium, right? And that bacterium functions in different ways outside of whatever signals we give it. And you need good bacteria, and you also have bad bacteria, which you want to reduce. So cleaning your gut is essentially the same thing as a culling or like a genocide on planet Earth. And it's dependent on who's in power and who's got the money and the energy at that time on who they get to decide gets culled. So yes, a lot of the people in our world today are basically playing God. Additionally, within the gut microbiome, there are cells that are connected directly into the nervous system, unlike the majority of those cells. They have a divine connection to the brain. Okay, and it's like 1 in every 30 or something like that. I don't remember what the ratio is, but it's the minority. So the vast minority of cells in the gut. There are some, however, that are essentially like watchers. They are prophets, prophetic cells, and they communicate with the brain through the gut-brain axis directly to God, directly to the God of your body, which would be the brain, and telling it, hey, things are bad down here, or hey, everything's fine down here. And then you get into like manna from heaven and all the other symbologies, right? And it just makes sense. It's energy mechanics. The monad, or the God of the universe, is constantly emanating a frequency. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. And, when you get into the logos of it, it's essentially the Christ, right? But that is an emanation. In the same way that the brain emanates the nervous system through the body, okay, interconnected to all the different organs, which are all segregated like the 12 tribes or like anything else, countries with borders. Why do they do this? It's because the wealthy elite know all of this. They know all of it. They've proven it. They believe it. And where this all kind of comes into play is, hey, if we're in the gut, and the celiac ganglion is basically like the demiurgical creator who says that it created us, but, really kind of didn't at the end of the day. Then how do we get closer to God? Well, we have to worship the demiurge. And this is where the mysticism comes in. This is where the spirituality of the wealthy elites comes in, because this is, I think, what they really believe. I think that they are fascinated with the idea that if they give to this demiurge, then they will essentially win life. And Jesus, when you get into the real esoterics of Rosicrucianism, Freemasonry. You get into these Hermetic or Gnostic orders, Order of the Golden Dawn. What they essentially believe is that Jesus is Lucifer. Not that Jesus is the devil. Jesus, the physical being, was a reflection of that lower child who then became embodied, understood man, died for man, and then went and ascended back and went back to his father. And that is why Jesus was the savior. Now, a lot of Jewish faith doesn't believe that because their ruling entity is essentially that demiurgical creator. The demiurge, okay? So Jesus comes back and says, no, the monad's the real God. And, this is the caveat. This is why the Jewish faith rejects Jesus, or one of the reasons, right? And I know a lot of people have the theories that are kind of going around where it's like, well, Jesus, was created as the prophet and the Messiah because they targeted him and they killed him. Well, yeah, that's true. But you have to understand, God had to separate parts of himself and tear himself apart in order to create reality. So God was not just all light, right? And this is, again, Jewish faith. The Jewish faith is, I think, very negative, right? They were slaves. They were kicked out into the desert. They wandered around. They had all this negativity that you can see is projected into their faith. So you have to take everything that they say with a grain of salt. Even today, the Jewish faith is very, very negative, and a lot of Jewish people are very psychologically negative. It makes sense. They've been harmed. First of all, they've been somewhat incestuous, and secondly, circumcision has been proven to cause brain damage to children. So especially males. So you're already coming in with a chip on your shoulder, so to speak, and then you learn from this spiritual faith, which basically tells you that your divine mother rejected you and doesn't love you anymore, and your whole purpose is to try to win her over again, so that you can get back to dad. Right? It's very negative. Not that it's not chock full of wisdom and amazing things, but it is. And so the whole point of this is essentially the Jewish faith. They have a lot of fundamental beliefs which kind of go against whatever I guess you would say like the Christian belief is at the end of the day. But their whole philosophy is, in order to, it's a hierarchy, and you have to give the dog its due first before you can get to the mother and before you can get to the father. Realistically, though, really what it means is at the end of the day, you have to find your purpose in the physical world. Then you start to be, you begin to be shown the things by the mother, the vibrational signature, right? Like the cells in your gut would start to feel the vibrations from your heart because your heart is emanating more. And then through the heart channel, like Jesus is always pointing to, then you get up into the mind. So it's very complex, very complicated. Again, we're interweaving a lot of different belief systems here. But at the end of the day, this is extremely potent, extremely powerful. I highly advise that you guys at least look into these ideas and you understand them a little bit more before kind of judging them, because what I'm talking about probably makes a lot more sense than what other people are talking about, where it's just like, hey, just have faith and just do this and just do that. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to showcase a little bit. I appreciate all of you guys who have been joining the school. It's been awesome. We've been having a lot of fun in here. I've got tons of courses on my school if you're interested that coincide with what I basically was just giving you, but they're a lot more detailed, they're a lot more advanced. I've got a Bible study metaphysical masterclass, a divine sexuality one. If you're looking to reset your mindset, you're trying to retrain your subconscious programming, I highly recommend taking my 7-part series. I also have a zodiac masterclass which goes into sidereal and Western astrology. I've got a philosophy masterclass where you'll learn more of what I just taught you today. And then there's also the consciousness activation masterclass. I'm also open to creating more. I want to create more, so I'm going to be. And additionally, let's say that you are in need of therapy. Okay, let's say you need more of a psychological perspective. Well, you can go to Astraya.ai. This is the AI tool that I built, where it's going to give you a rundown of your astrology every day. It is going to incorporate astrological information, numerological information, your cell salt information, and it's going to give you that feedback every day. You can also chat with it as well. So there's a little chat function. So you can talk to it about all of your problems. All of your data is highly, highly secret. Okay, it's privatized. None of this information is public. None of this information goes back to any of the chats, like ChatGPT or Claude or any of those. This is all private. And it is extremely important to me that it is private. Here's some of the payment structures. Now, I recommend the 99. If you're going to go forward with this, go for the 99 because you're going to get the astrology page. You're going to get all the functionality. I know it might seem like it's expensive, but just for perspective, if you meet with me, this is, once a month. If you were to meet with me once a month, that's like 4 times more expensive than just having this. And then you get daily information, daily readings. It's got a whole knowledge base on the back end where you can learn all of my information, all of my research. It's got all of my research on the back end, so you can talk to it, ask it questions, etc. But this is something that I've worked really hard on. I probably put like about 1,500 hours into building this. I'm always working on things for my people, okay? I'm never just sitting around doing nothing. This is something I'm looking to expand. The school is something I'm looking to expand. And here's the other deal. Both of these, both my school and my app, have uncapped commissions. All right. Now, from an affiliate program. Now, what does that mean? You will get a link, and you can use that link to share it with other people. And the commissions for the link is about 30%. So if you're utilizing the links and you send it to your friends, if you get 3 people to sign up for any of these services, you automatically get a third of your payment covered. So if you get 3 people to sign up, you get the whole thing for free, essentially. And then anything beyond that, you actually will make money off of. So you'll actually get uncapped commissions. So if you've got a big social media platform and you enjoy my content, join the school, join the app, whichever seems more appropriate for you. Use those affiliate links, and it will pay you as well off of all the hard work that I've done so that I can share with my people, because I love you guys. I wanted to create something that was going to be not only affordable, but also something that was going to be insightful. I've worked a hell of a lot on all of this information, these theories, and I would really, really appreciate if you guys would support me in any which way possible. I know times are tough right now. I know that the government is shut down in the United States. I know that money is tight. Things are going to get better. Okay, and if we all focus on our frequency and we all raise our frequency, and if any of this helps you do that or helps your friends and your family do that, well, then everything is going to get better, because we're going to be more insightful, we're going to be more intuitive, and we're going to be more connected to the divine. So I love you guys, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. I'm not going to stop posting. I'm not giving up, because I'm never give up. I embody that. Even when times are tough and things are hard, I never give up. I will never abandon you guys. I will always be here, no matter what happens or how often I have to make videos. But I love you guys, and I can't wait to see you in tomorrow's video. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Stay safe, and I'll see you guys soon. Love you. Bye.